My name is Ruta, and I'm here to talk about what I have learned through the years of my searches and experimentation and trying to find that one thing that is going to make me heal. So, I wanted to talk about anxiety because anxiety is one thing that I have been struggling with for a very, very long time in my life. And also, I know there are few people out there who are also really struggling with the same problem. And I have learned some things throughout my life and my experience that we don't really often hear in a popular self-help field. My aim today is to explain you what I found out and what I found works. So, I guess the first thing that many of us want to do whenever we are faced with uncomfortable, burning feeling of anxiety is to try to make that thing go away. So, we try to make this feeling go away, and we also try to make the situation go away. Sometimes we try to do both, so then we stop feeling it. Right? At least that's been my experience and what I have been seeing through my life. The problem is with anxiety when we are faced with it and when we try to use some methods to combat anxiety is that we don't really look at the cause of anxiety. So, it might be interesting for you to find out that anxiety is actually a symptom. And it is quite easy to understand it as a symptom when you think about it like this. If you have blood coming out of your arm, the problem is not the actual blood. The problem is that you have a wound that is bleeding. The same with anxiety. Anxiety shows that there is some other deeper wound in you which is still not healed. So there is some fear, some feeling of uncomfort. There is some deeper, further hidden emotion hiding behind the symptom of anxiety. So most of the things that we do or I've seen being done is kind of like to make the symptom go away. And there are few techniques that actually look into the reason why this anxiety is happening in the first place. So in this webinar, we will be talking about the root cause of your anxiety. What happens with anxiety or any other emotion, but in this case we're going to use anxiety as example, is at some point in our lives we have experienced a traumatizing event. And also for any of you who may think that trauma is kind of like something really, really strong, like being in a war, loss of a loved one, that's also trauma. But the definition of trauma that I use and my fellow practitioners and coaches use in our field is that anything that has happened that made you feel that you don't have emotional resources to deal with that situation at that time is trauma. If you think about the other types of spirituality and other types of healing modalities, they often use term which is called soul retrieval. So how does it map in the trauma rationale and the picture to demonstrate the anxiety root cause? At that situation, at that time, you can imagine that there was a part of you who left itself locked in time, locked in that situation. don't have to go esoterical on that. We can just imagine it as it is kind of like our emotional experience and emotional time and emotional situation, which is still within us and it's still in us. So somewhere in us, somewhere within us, we have that part of us stuck in that trauma that we have experienced. We may have even forgotten about it, but we know it is not resolved. How? Because it is causing problems to us right now, like anxiety, for example. When we feel anxious, it's not so much that the situation itself that is at fault. Let's say if we use example of, say we have an interview or presentation. Okay, let's say interview, and we feel extreme levels of anxiety. And then we think, okay, if we could only make this interview go away, we would be fine. But now, if we look at another person who is also in an interview situation, probably it's quite normal to feel nervous before interview or before any kind of like a performance situation like that. But that other person might feel anxious to some degree or might feel nervous, but the anxiety level is not that high that it would prevent that person from even going there. So that's where we can see there is a difference between healthy expression of emotion and emotion that has become a problematic, like in this case, anxiety that is actually acting as a block for us to even go there. Basically, in the method that I'm using, which is called metaphysical anatomy technique, we are addressing not only the emotion, and we don't necessarily need to go back into the reliving the memory, but we use emotion as string, as a tracking device to find exactly where in the body we have that emotional stress stuck in. So where we didn't complete this trauma cycle, and where in our brain and our conscious and our psyche we have hooked emotion and that situation and anticipation of that emotion and that situation with our body's instinctual reactions. Because very often we feel like we, in certain situations, when it's triggered, we have no control over what's happening with us emotionally whatsoever. And why is that? Like, let's take extreme anxiety and fear. So is it because we have a weak willpower? Is it because we haven't trained ourselves to do that? Is it because we are a weak person? No, none of that. None of those things. One thing that is actually making us react in such a way is the fact that our emotional responses that are linked to that situation that is causing us to feel anxiety has been tied with our instinctual responses. So instinctual responses are kind of like a automatic reactions. We don't really have much control over it. Instinctual reactions would be a lion chasing us and we are running. We don't really think about it. Are we being coward or not? We're just running for it, right? So the same happens with some of our emotional reactions and emotional experiences when we don't have resources to complete trauma cycle at the time when stressful event happened, or it was so intense that when we were a child we just didn't know what to do with it and there was nobody who helped, or maybe we were ashamed for crying or being coward, or any of those things can lock in trauma. And that's why we are still experiencing today, and we see that we still have it by observing our emotional reactions and our reactions to triggers. So in a workshop, what we're going to do, we will look into your personal associations with anxiety, what core emotions are behind anxiety, what core fears are behind anxiety, and what also you needed at that time when you were experiencing that. We will be also looking in if any of that emotional stress is to do with somebody else in your environment, because what happens when we are children, when we are young, we sometimes copy emotions of those people around us. We will be looking at ancestral predisposition for feeling these emotions too, because what can happen, and it's been proven and it's been investigated by science of epigenetics, is called, how trauma can be passed from generation to generation via, you can say DNA, or you can say like invisible DNA, but via energy coming from one generation to another. So we will be also looking at that. So I invite you to join this workshop and to see for yourself and to discover your own body's ability to find the root cause of the problem, to identify it and to unlink it. And that's how we can start our healing journey, by actually addressing the root cause of the problem. Thank you very much for giving me your time and for listening to my perspective on this. And I hope to see you soon, because I know that you do deserve to feel better. Have a good day.